I tried to give you a glowing start. So let's first, no pressure at all. How do we make agriculture fun is a good question to start with, but I'm going to start first with the fact that how does a city girl from Addis Ababa move to another urban center like New York and then suddenly go, hang on a minute, I'm going to get into the food and agricultural world because that fascinates me. City girls don't tend to think like farmers. What's the story there?
I think city girls can think any way they want. So like you rightfully said, I was born and raised in Ethiopia in Addis Ababa, and I ended up in the US on scholarship for university. And I went to college at a women's college called Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts, and then found myself in London, where I got recruited to a Wall Street internship, as Wall Street is one of the few places that actually hires a lot of international students. So I kind of fell into that job. And that was the beginning of my career, which started as a trader in commodities. So I actually used to trade oil and gas. So the shift from oil and gas to agriculture was a little bit of a big one. But becoming a trader, you recognize all of the, you make money basically capturing arbitrage opportunities. And I had seen the amount of efficiency that had been brought to energy markets. And as I started looking at investing in agriculture, which was around the time of the financial crisis in 2008 and 9, I just realized how much more complicated and messed up it was. And that small kind of interest led to a complete obsession, and really like a lack of interest in doing what I was doing, which was trading. So I just decided to quit and try something completely new. I mean,
how old were you when you decided to do that? It's a brief decision.
At the time, I was 29.
So at 29, you decide to quit the fancy, flashy Wall Street job, start Grow Intelligence. Tell us a little bit, for those of us who might not know enough about the company, what is Grow, what does it do, and how do you think it can change the pattern of the food industry and how we look at global hunger?
Yeah, well, when I quit, I wish I quit to start Grow Intelligence. My boss reminded me of what I told him when I quit, and he was like, please take a sabbatical. Like, you sound like you've lost your mind. But at the time, it was, I'm obsessed with agriculture. I want to be connected to home, to Ethiopia. Food security issues are, huge in Africa. And I don't think we can solve it until we solve the capital structure problem. So I'm going to start this company, and it's going to do this stuff with farmers, and we're going to do mobile apps. And he reminded me I created symbology recently that I forgot. But anyway, so when I quit, it was an interest in ag, and I took 2 years off to actually figure out what this company and this product was going to be. And so it was 2014 that the company really started. And those 2 years, I became a student of the world. I traveled across farms everywhere in the world you could imagine. I wanted to know if information was lacking or we just didn't know where to find it. Did we need to create new data, or did we need to organize it? And as soon as it became clear to me that it was an organizational problem, I said, okay, this I actually know how to do, because I did this for energy markets. I saw what this can do. I can see how capital markets can be completely transformed through that. And so that's what Grow Intelligence does. We harvest really large amounts of data from around the world. This could be data that comes from satellites and weather stations to government agencies, commodity exchanges, small trade organizations no one's ever heard of. There's like the Avocado Association and the International Cocoa Association. And we take all of this data. We're processing north of 800 trillion data points a day now. And we created a language that normalizes all of it. Because one of the things we realized was, hey, agriculture, first of all, is not just 4 or 5 crops. It's tens of thousands of different crops, animals. It's this big system that's messy and very interconnected. And so we developed a completely new language and a dictionary. So I was somewhere, on point with the symbology idea, just to know what it was called back then. That normalizes all of this information. And once we stitch it together, it gives us a certain amount of visibility into the world. So it enables discovery. But then once you discover, you then want to predict. So it gives you the clean data infrastructure that you need to now start forecasting anything that could be driving the supply or anything that could be driving the demand of really agricultural products. And that's actually one of the things that I also started to appreciate a lot more once I started the company, which was when we think agriculture, we think food.
Yeah.
And there's this very famous quote that says, eating is an agricultural act. And I realized living is an agricultural act because, you know, oftentimes you wake up in the morning and you don't appreciate you're waking up to cotton sheets. That's agriculture. You use a bar of soap that's used some form of extracted oils from some plant that's embedded in it. And so everything we do involves it and we don't understand it.
So who are the clients? Because very famously you've said, we work with everyone in the ecosystem but the farmer. Is that a problem or is that one of the advantages? Who are the clients and how does that data impact the farmer even if you don't deal with them?
Yeah, our clients are, like you said, everyone but the farmer. So think of it as anyone who sells product to farmers. So seed, input, crop protection, money. So banks, insurance companies, intermediaries. So that's your trading community that's essentially transferring risk. And then buyers, CPG companies, wholesalers and retailers of fresh produce. And we think it's a great advantage. The reason we think it's a great advantage is that if our goal is to drive up the productivity of farmers, if our goal is to drive down the cost of food and make it more equitable, then we must be able to price and transfer risk way more efficiently. And that transfer of risk happens across these organizations. And by creating an efficiency in the way they all operate and being a platform that powers all of them, you create a base level of knowledge that allows for a certain amount of understanding and much better risk management of those businesses. And our long-term theory is that, you know, success for us will be when, you know, I always give the statistics, 63% of sub-Saharan Africans are involved in agriculture in some form, and less than 1% of outstanding bank loans have anything to do with the agricultural industry. If we can move that 1 to 10%, that means that you have pushed money in the right direction at the right cost. Because again, it's not just a question of getting money in the hands of farmers, it's a question of getting it at the right cost so that they're essentially able to make money, but also the end product is affordable for all.
Getting money into the hands of the farmers is one thing, but you're a female founder. Getting money into your hands might have been an interesting story. You landed TPG as a backer. You also landed Data Collective, TPG, as we know, were the early backers for Airbnb, Uber, Spotify. That's a big name to get. What was that story like as a female founder going out, selling the story where one boss has told you, take a sabbatical, think really hard, what are you doing? And then going out and pitching that and getting the money that you needed?
That same boss is one of the first people that wrote my checks when I went and asked for money. So the first pool of money for the company came from the people I worked with, people that I had traded for 8.5 years. I'd done really well. The one thing that Wall Street did afford me was that opportunity at 29 to say, what's the worst that can happen? But also, it lets you take tremendous amounts of risk early on if you show promise. And so those same people were the ones I went to. And I think that gave us the first $4 million that we needed. Literally came from myself and a combination of people that I worked for, were my competitors or my customers. And then the next batch was when we went for institutional money. And there it was about telling a global story. And I think initially it was complicated because we're actually not a company or a product that's trying to mimic something that someone has done before. And so I couldn't give analogies of what we're trying to do. Yeah. So learning to communicate our vision has, frankly, continues to be a big part of our journey and my journey as an entrepreneur. But we've now raised 40 million, and actually one of our backers is in the room, which is GGV.
Well, good to know. Let's open that on that note to some questions from the room. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Our mic handlers will come to you.
Hi, I'm Robin Culver. I'm with Canadian Tire, but I'm asking this question on behalf of my daughter and maybe some of the other young women in the room. Your story is fascinating in terms of how you got into doing what you're doing. And I think it's hard for kids to figure out how to pursue their passion. So you go to university, and I think a lot of the guidance counselors are still pushing kind of traditional jobs. No one would have imagined your story, I don't think, at a guidance counselor's office.
And your question, because we are running out of time.
Okay, so on behalf of the kids that are in science and looking for a way to move forward in a very innovative way, these sorts of opportunities are hard to find. What's your advice for kids that want to do something different?
It's a tough one. I think I was lucky in the sense that I was raised in a home that gave me, I guess, boundless freedom to explore. It's maybe not as traditional. And so in some ways I was raised to be a little bit fearless. And it also had to do with the fact that my grandmother so Ethiopia was the only African country that was never colonized. It was occupied by the Italians, but it was never colonized. And my grandfather orchestrated the plot to kill General Graziani and ultimately got assassinated. My grandmother was pregnant with my father when she got taken as a prisoner of war, and my father was born in an Italian prison. And so growing up, I had her, I was named after her. He was very close to her, but I think I had that as kind of my northern star, so nothing seemed impossible. So I think in some ways, and this is something I'm learning, which is I've been relatively quiet and private, which is maybe the more stories we see, the more fearless we become. And some of us have it at home, which I think I was lucky to have, and others find it through stories that they hear elsewhere. So maybe it's the power of telling stories.
Who's got the next question right there?
Hi, my name is Kumi Somaskan, and anecdotally, I've been to Mount Holyoke because they do bring a lot of international students, probably like 25 years ago, because I have a couple of cousins who went there. I assume that was a very big part of how you got to Wall Street. But the question I have for you is, how did you sort of know where to sell your product? Like, I get the idea, it's very cool, but how did you make the first start on selling your product?
I mean, like I said, it took me 2 years to even figure out what product to build. So, you know, when we're trying to map and understand a system that's been around since the Neolithic Revolution, it just takes time, and you just have to try things. And so the first iteration of our business model was, do we go to, you know, everybody and anybody? So do we go to small and medium businesses? Do we, because that's ultimately our goal. Our goal is not just to be a provider of data and data infrastructure for large companies. Our goal is, how do we democratize access? And when we first went to the market, we went and said, let's go small bits at a time. And that was really difficult to do. And the reason that was difficult to do is no one had budget because they'd never heard of a product like ours. And so we took a different approach and said, why don't we go to the C-suite? Which again sounded crazy at the time because no one's heard of us, so how do I get meetings with CEOs of Fortune 100 companies? But go in and convince them that this is something that they need to do if they're gonna be ahead and get ahead of the markets and be ready and braced for, you know, climate change. And that started to work. And it requires a lot of buy-in from every organization, so every time we do a sale, we're really doing a top-down and bottom-up sale at the same time. But, you know, I think it's a bit of a process. It's experimentation. It's lots of failure. It's no different than inventing a product, I guess, which is you build it and you're like, I hope they want it. I think this is right.
Well, I think we're pretty much running out of time. So on that note of that particular statement, here's a last question for you. You are a disruptor. Even though the technology is new, you are still dealing with the USDA and others who have been putting this data out, and you're not their favorite person, politely put. How do you deal with the incumbents and the thought processes that are still stuck, maybe, perhaps, in another generation? How do you change minds and mindsets?
You engage. And there's really no other way around it because, as you said, there are incumbents. It's a relatively old industry. If you look at the ag census, I mean, you don't have, and that really goes from farmers all the way to industry and to corporates. You know, I'm not a typical agricultural executive. But you have to engage, and you have the hard conversations. You become very open and transparent. So we've taken a very different approach to our models and our predictive AI, which is openness. So we essentially open up the methodology. We publish the methodology. When we're right publicly. When we're wrong publicly. And eventually the idea is that you build trust, because none of these models are perfect. So what we're saying is we're not a perfect solution, but we are a way to getting to a place that's much better than where we are today.
Trust seems to be a word that we've used a lot in the past 2 days. On that note, Sara, thank you so very much for joining us. Give her a round of applause for doing what she's doing.